Meghadoota that's being delivered by our young friend, scholar, poet, Shri B.N. Shashikiran, the institution and even the people who have instituted this endowment, and of course all the people who have come here to listen to him. We are all extremely grateful to Shri Shashikiran for this wonderful, insightful exposition without losing track of the profundity, the tenderness and the beauty of the poem. Perhaps I can say in English, in the spoken word form, we don't find such an exposition of Meghadoota in any of the popular media, whether it is the internet or YouTube or whatsoever. We don't find, because we find lot of expositions being given to Vedanta, Yoga, Ramayana, Mahabharata and the like, but not to people like Kalidasa. Even when the exposition is being given, it is literal. How to understand the text word by word? It's highly literal, and it may be of some use to the basic learner, but not to a connoisseur, but not to a Rasika in the real sense. Rasikas need the multi-layered interpretation of the poetry. What is the suggestion involved, and why this particular word is apt, and why it is suitable, and why only this way of expression is more enjoyable, why not the other? All these things can only be appreciated and revealed by a trained Rasika. In that sense, true appreciator of Kavya should be another poet. It's the recreation of poetry. And of course, many times what suggestions are felt by a true Rasika may not even be known by the poet, the original author. Kavikkaroti kavyani rasiko vetti tadrasam. In that sense, Shashikiran has done a commendable job, not just because he is my good friend, I am praising him. Anyone who would listen to him would find this as a fact. And he has revealed so many beautiful things. For example, in the first talk itself, he told, for poetry, for great poetry, we should have some qualifications. He paired two words, Darshana and Kalpana, Varnana and Kathana. Great poetry will involve a penetrating vision and understanding of life as a whole, and also an imaginative way of putting out things. That's very, very important. People with insightful appreciation for life may not be artists. To become an artist, he or she needs imagination, that is Kalpana. But to become a great artist, one essentially needs an insightful observation, introspection, all-time relevance, and also Varnana, description. Description is always coupled by imagination. And Kathana, of course, it's product of imagination, but Kathana is more connected with Darshana. Because a true story, a believable story, a reasonable story full of human emotions can only be spun around by a person of insightfulness, by a person of vision. And in that sense, he has succinctly put these four words together as a pair, Darshana, Kalpana, Varnana and Kathana. I think it is the way of reducing things into one appreciable formula, and that has been one of the byproducts of this lecture. Though it is meant for the appreciation of lyric like Meghadoota, and even while describing the Kamarupatva, the wish, the form which it can take as per its wish, the cloud which can take any form of its choice, that has been constantly developed by the speaker. Whether it is seen as an elephant involving itself in a sportive movement, Vaprakrida Paranata Gaja Prekshaniyam Dadarsha, and today you will be seeing how cloud will be taking the shape of Vamana, becoming Trivikrama. So in that way, looking at every aspect of poetry and trying to extend it without stretching, without a strainful expression throughout the poem, it is something really marvelous. And such has been the erudition and the heartfelt appreciation of our speaker. I can say, I've seen many university professors, Pathshala Vidwans, and wishful poets, and boasting poets. We are the best poets like that. So many internet poets are available every nook and corner. And their falsified appreciators are also there. Big fanfare is also going on. But no one in their league is able to connect to a poem like Meghadootam as Shashi has done. And this is a really a welcoming change in the world of younger scholarship and younger Rasikatva. Only by age he is younger and not by merit or deed. And that's why I have nothing but appreciation for that. Shlishta kriya kasyajit atma samstha sankrantir anyasya vishesha yukta yasyo bhayam sadhu sa shikshakanam dhuri pratisthapayitavya eva. This is again a quote from Malavikagnimitram of Kalidasa. One has good understanding and learning, and someone has good expression, but it is hard and rare to find a person who is both, who is put together. And that rare combination is Sri Shashikiran, who has a lot of erudition, compassionate appreciation and understanding of Indian culture in general and Sanskrit poetry and Indian poetry in particular. And he has a willful, beautiful expression also, and a sustained expression, because it is very difficult to speak on Meghadootam for 4 consecutive days as his maiden attempt. Many may not be knowing he is just 23-year-old physically, and this is the first lecture series which he is delivering, and his first lecture on Meghadoota. And not many people who have experience and erudition for decades together on Meghadoota can speak so fluently and so meaningfully, so insightfully like that. And hence, dhuri pratisthapa itavya eva. Sa vaktra madhye dhuri pratisthapa itavya eva. With this, I conclude my heartfelt appreciation and vote of thanks to Sri Shashikiran on behalf of all of you. Thank you.
Swasti pantha manucharema surya chandramasa aviva punaradadata gnata janata sangame mahi jayanti sthayi sanchara bhava bhinaya bhavukaha Neelalohita shailusha bhrulatalasya vibhramaha Kalidasa giram saram Kalidasa saraswati Chaturmukhothava sakshad vidurnanye tumadrishaha. Sarvebhyo namaha. A very warm welcome to all of you for this last day's lecture on Mahakavi Kalidasa's Meghadootam. Yesterday we had come till the point where the cloud has just reached the Himalaya, and we had seen some descriptions that the poet beautifully gives in that context. And we had also seen the description of the region of Brahmavarta that Kalidasa chooses to do then. And in connection with that, I wish to tell you a few things about Kalidasa's poetry. In the very first day, while giving an introduction about Kalidasa, I had said that he is a poet who represents Indian culture in all its entirety. He is one such poet. And this we see in almost all his works. He gives expression to various facets of Indian culture in almost all his works, and particularly in his Mahakavya Raghuvamsham, and in this Meghadoota, which is a lyric or a khanda kavya. In Raghuvamsham, the job is quite easy, so to speak, in only one way, because it is a Mahakavya, it is spread out in 19 sargas, and it is quite easy to incorporate all those elements into the poetry in that manner. And in Meghadoota, which has only about 115 verses, it is really difficult to achieve that. But Kalidasa has done that very beautifully. And we see that not just as a one-off event in a single verse or two, but as a constant feature in the entire span of Meghadoota. For example, he says, Janakatanaya snana punyodakeshu and Raghupati padair ankitam mekhalasu at the very beginning of Meghadoota. This gives a very beautiful connection to the story of Ramayana, as we all know. And even about Meghadoota, even about Mahabharata, as we saw yesterday, while describing the land of Kurukshetra, he relates to the story of Arjuna very easily. He draws from Mahabharata as though, it is taken for granted. And this we really have to keep in mind. This is the blessing, this is the privilege that we enjoy as Indians, that we know the stories of Ramayana, Mahabharata and the Puranas very easily, and the poet need not take any additional pains in order to tell the story, narrate to us the story. Where since we have the corpus, the bank of the stories in our head very well established, it is very easy for us to relate to that and enjoy the poetry, without any interest or speculation about where the story would lead. This is something we enjoy as Indians. And not just about Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are very popular. Kalidasa also connects to the tradition of Brihat Katha, which is somewhat ignored in Sanskrit poetry. By Kalidasa says, while describing Ujjaini, he says, Udayana Katha Kovidak Grama Vruddhan. Thereby connecting to the lineage through the tradition of Brihat Katha. And not just that, he very easily draws from the Puranic lore as well. He talks about the story of Gajasura Samhara, for example, and as Dr. Ganesh mentioned here, we are going to see today the story of Trivikrama or Vamana Avatara, and various avatars of Vishnu. For example, he draws from the Bhagavata Purana or the Mahabharata or Harivamsha, any of that, when he says Gopaveshasya Vishnoho. And we have many such instances which are found, which are referenced to in a very subtle manner in Meghadoota. And if this is about the literature, this is about Kavya in per se, Kalidasa also gives a connection, though not explicitly, to the Vedas themselves, which are, the fountainhead of everything that is Indian. He does not do this in an explicit manner, but by giving reference to the land of Brahmavarta, which is a land of both creation and proliferation of Vedic mantras. Many Vedic mantras are said to be seen by the mantra drashtaraha in that land. So in this way, Kalidasa proves himself inevitable to anyone who wants to understand Indian culture, whether it is from the standpoint of poetry, of which Kalidasa is an acknowledged authority, or just about Indian culture. Even for that, Kalidasa is an inevitable source. So, with that introduction, we had seen the land of Himalayas being described by Kalidasa, and he says, you have by now, the Yaksha says to the cloud, you have by now gone through many places in the region of Himalayas, and now you go further north and you will meet a region, a place called Krauncha or the Hamsadwara. He writes a verse describing that. Praleyadre rupatatam atikramya tamstan visheshan atikramya tamstan visheshan hamsadwaram bhrugupati yasho vartmayat krauncharandhram tenodichim dishamanusarehe tiryagayamashobhi shyamah pado balinyamanad abhyutasyeva vishnoho. This has a reference to the story of Bali Chakravarti and Vamana, who grew himself to be Trivikrama. So in the first pada he says, having enjoyed the sight of many places in the region of Himalayas, you must proceed further in order to reach the Alaka Nagari, and there you will see the Hamsadwara, which almost serves as a gateway for migratory birds to enter into the Manasa Sarovara, and for them to have an access to lands on either sides. And he says, Bhrugupati Yasho Vartma Yat Krauncharandhram. You will also see the Krauncharandhra there. Disham Anusarehe Tiryagayama Shobhi. So the place, the Randhra itself, it is called a Randhra. It looks as though it is only a slit in the mountains. So if the cloud, it cannot obviously enter into a slit in the shape that it actually is. So Kalidasa describes it very beautifully as Tiryagayama Shobhi. You have to compress yourself in size and enter into that slit. And when you do that, how do you appear? The cloud is itself dark. You appear like the dark foot of Vishnu that is ready to put down the Bali Chakravarti. That is how Kalidasa connects with the Puranic story. And here, why it is referred to as Bhrugupati Yasho Vartma is because there is a Puranic story again that Ishvara, that is Shiva, taught Dhanurveta to Parashurama on the mount, on Kailasa Parvata, on the Kailasa mountain. And there once arose a competition between Skanda and Parashurama about, who is good at archery. And Kartikeya shot an arrow at the Krauncha mountain, and Parashurama wanted to better that. So he also shot an arrow at the mountain, and that created a slit, a fissure of sorts through the mountain, and that is known as Krauncha. And it is because of that. And this is a geographical reality. It is seen even to this day in that part of the country. It is near a place called Harshil in India. So we can also relate to this by, if anybody has seen, they can relate to this poem better. And in those regions, again, as the cloud moves forward, Kalidasa again describes the peaks of Himalayas, how they appear. He says, Gatva chordhvam dashamukha bhujo chwasita prasthaskandehe Kailasasya tridasha vanita darpana syatithisyaha Shrungochrayehi kumuda vishadaihi yo vitatya sthitah kham rashibhutah pratidinamivas trembakasyattahasaha. I had ended yesterday's lecture by a brief reference to the last line of this verse. So what does he say? Gatva chordhvam, when you ascend in your path and reach the peaks, the top positions of the Himalaya mountain, those peaks which were dismantled in their position by Ravana when he tried to lift up the Kailasa mountain, those peaks are dismantled. Dashamukha bhujo chwasita prasthaskandehe Kailasasya, of the Kailasa mountain, Tridasha vanita darpanasya atithisyaha. Kalidasa gives a very apt adjective to describe Himalayas or the Kailasa mountain. He says it is like a mirror which is used by the celestial women in order to, when they want to decorate themselves, they will obviously need a mirror. So what is the mirror that they use? It is the almost transparent regions of the Kailasa mountain which serves as the mirror to them. Darpanasya atithisyaha. And what is the added advantage of the cloud to go there? You will be reflected in that mirror. So darpanasya atithisyaha. So when it is almost like the people in the heaven, the divine damsels, they will be having a look into the mirror to, correct their looks or for any sort of those things. And when the cloud happens to pass by, even it can take a look at those divine women. That is the suggestion here. Shrungochrayehi kumuda vishadaihi vitatya sthitah kham. So how is the Himalaya? It is so elevated in its position that it almost appears to cover the entire expanse of the sky. The entire Akasha is covered by the sky-touching peaks of Himalayas mountains, and those peaks of the mountains appear like white lotuses that cover up the entire sky. And he gives a beautiful epithet to Himalayas again. He says it is almost like the laughter of Shiva, which is accumulated day after day after day. Pratidinamiva rashi bhutaha pratidinamiva trembakasya attahasaha. So Kalidasa describes Himalaya in that way. And in the next verse, we see one aspect of Kalidasa that many poets have tried to emulate the poetic genius of Kalidasa. Rather than emulate, they have tried to imitate Kalidasa, but they have failed on multiple fronts. And one such is the description of colors. So if somebody asks us, what color is this mic, for instance, I would say it is black. If someone asks me what sort of black is it, I might not be able to give a convincing answer at the very moment. But Kalidasa can give a convincing answer. He can convince anybody about the actual shade of black that this mic is. And that comes from a very intent observation of nature. Otherwise, we simply cannot differentiate between shades of colors. It is really difficult. It only comes from a compassionate and disinterested observation of nature. So here we see the description of the colors black and white, just black and white. For two, it is not spread across the entire gamut of the color spectrum. Kalidasa does not talk about yellows or oranges or any such thing. It is just black and white, and he gives us, he lets us know that there is so much to appreciate between just those two colors, black and white. He says, Utpashyami tvai tatagate snigdha bhinna anjanabhe sadyah krutta dvirada dashana cheda gaurasya tasya shobha madre stimita nayana prekshaniyam bhavitrim aunsanyaste sati halabhruto mechake vasasiva. So in the first pada, he says, Utpashyami tvai tatagate. When you, with a black complexion, with a dark blue complexion, when you approach the Himalayas, how are you looking? Snigdha bhinna anjanabhe. It is almost like powdered anjana, powdered collyrium, which women use to, or charcoal, or the collyrium which women use to, decorate their eyes, and which is also oily. Snigdha bhinna anjanabhe, powdered collyrium which is oily. Sadyah kritta dvirada dashana cheda gaurasya tasya. And how is the mountain itself? It is white. It is somewhat, it has a touch of cream color to it. And how does that appear? Sadyah kritta dvirada dashana cheda varnasya cheda gaurasya tasya. It is like a fresh piece of elephant's ivory that has been cut. Freshly cut piece of ivory. So how does that appear? The mountain has that color to it. None of us would have observed a freshly cut piece of ivory, and Kalidasa alludes this color to the mountain of Himalayas. And then he says, Shobha madre stimitanayana prekshaniyam bhavitrim. So, and that sight will be so beautiful that people won't even feel like batting their eyelids when looking at that sight. So it will be so beautiful, Kalidasa says. And he also gives another example of the color. So if in the first two lines, the allusion to colors is because of an observation of nature. And in the last line comes an equally beautiful description of color, which is drawn from the Puranic lore, which is drawn from our Itihasa. He says, Aunsanyaste sati halabhruto mechake vasasiva. It will, the mountain with you in front of it, with you on top of it, will appear like Balarama, who is covered with dark garments. So Balarama is said to have garments which are dark in color, and Balarama, who himself was of a fair complexion. So the mountain is alluded to Balarama, and the dark garment of his is alluded to the cloud. So this is the range, the sheer poetic range of Kalidasa. And while the cloud is moving across the path of Himalayas, it will see Himalaya or the Kailasa mountain itself is said to be the Krida Shaila, or the pleasure mountain of the divine couple, of the Adi Anadi Dampati, that is Ishvara and Parvati. So when the cloud happens to pass by, it will be encountered on its path by Shiva and Parvati, who are taking just a stroll. I had made a mention of this in some day of my lecture, on the first day. So the cloud gets to see Shiva and Parvati while they are taking a stroll together. So, and what is the cloud expected to do there? Kalidasa tells in this verse, Hitva tasmin bhujaga valayam shambhuna dattahasta krida shaile yadicha vicharehe tadacharena gauri bhangi bhaktya virachita vapuho stambhitantar jalaughaha sopanatvam kuru manitata rohanaya agrayayi. So Kalidasa says Parvati is finding it really difficult to keep pace with Shiva as they are taking a stroll together. Why? Because the Kailasa mountain is filled with rugged rocks, and Parvati, being of a very slender, very timid, very beautiful nature, she is finding hard to chart her way across that rocky terrain, and she is also scared to hold on to Shiva's hand, because it is filled with snakes all over his body. He has for his bracelets snakes that are coiled all over his forearms, his wrist, and all such things. So Shiva, out of his love and compassion for his wife, he takes off that Bhujanga Valaya, even though momentarily, and lends a helping hand for Parvati to hold on. Hitva tasmin bhujagavalayam shambhuna datta hasta. Shiva is holding on to Parvati, or rather Parvati is holding on to Shiva. Krida shaile, in that Kailasa mountain, yadicha vicharehe tasmad acharena gauri bhangi bhaktya. You, with all devotion, you have a responsibility of helping Parvati here. Virachita vapuhu stambitantar jaloghaha. So the cloud, again it is a reference to the Kamarupatva of the cloud. The Yaksha is telling the cloud that you have to become solidified in a manner, because in one of the previous verses the Yaksha had asked it to compress in its size, to become very thin in order to pass through the crown charandra. Now that won't suffice for the cloud to help Parvati. He says, Stambitantar jaloghaha. You have to, really make static the current of water that is inside you and make yourself solidified and convert yourself into a flight of stairs for Parvati to step on and, to ascend in the jeweled slopes of Himalayas. Sopanatvam kuru. Turn yourself into a flight of stairs. Manitata rohanaya agrayai, for Parvati to climb. That is how beautifully Kalidasa describes, at every position of the Himalaya, and there is some reference to the cloud in every verse. I had told this, and there is some sort of an incentive for the cloud found at every place that it goes. It does not, it is engaged in some activity or the other for it to entertain itself. And then we come to the end of Purva Megha here. This is the last verse, and now the cloud is actually getting to see the Alaka Nagari, the city of Alaka, where the Yaksha's house actually is, and we have a description of the Alaka Nagari. Because the Yaksha has to, give a very accurate description for the cloud to recognize the Alaka Nagari. So he says, Tasyot sange pranayina iva srasta gangadukulam natvam drishtva napunaralakam gnyasyase kamacharin yavah kale vahati salilodgara muchairvimanam muktajala grathita malakam kamini vabhravrindham. So Alaka is located on the lap of the Himalayas, as I said before. And how does that appear? The Alaka Nagari, which is there on the lap of the Himalayas, is like a very beautiful woman who is sleeping on the lap of her lover. And Srasta Ganga Dukulam, and the Alaka Nagari has for her garment the river Ganga herself. And that is flowing all across her body. Natvam drishtva napunaralakam nyasyase kamacharin. You won't fail to recognize Alaka, which is so distinctly recognizable in this way. Yavah kale vahati salilodgara muchairvimanam. And the city of Alaka is full of mansions is full of skyscrapers that support clouds when they are giving out rains. So the mansions, the buildings in Alaka were so high that they were touching the clouds themselves. They had reached into the position of the sky itself, and it would support the clouds when it gives out rains. And how does this appear? Just like, the beautiful locks or the tresses of women which support a string of pearls. If we imagine a woman who has decorated her tresses with a string of pearls, the buildings of the Alaka Nagari which support the cloud is something like this. So at every region, during every description, Kalidasa gives a reference to the cloud and also does the job of describing the place which the cloud has to proceed to. And now we move on to the Uttara Megha, where the Yaksha says everything in that Alaka Nagari bears some resemblance with the cloud itself. So how does that happen? We will see in this verse. Vidyutvantam lalita vanitaha sendrachapam sachitraha sangeetaya prahata murajaha snigdha gambhira ghosham antastoyam manimaya bhuvaha Tungam abhram lihagraha prasadastvam tulaitumalam yatra taistair visheshaihi. So the prasadas, the high standing mansions of Alakanagari, bear resemblance to the cloud on multiple fronts because of multiple reasons. So Kalidasa lists them all out. He says Vidyutvantam, the cloud is associated with the lightning always, and Lalita Vanitaha, the lightning itself is very slender, and the mansions have slender women there. So that is one similarity. Sendra Chapam Sachitraha, the cloud is, though not always, sometimes it is associated with the rainbow, as we saw Gopaveshasya Vishnoha in that verse. It is associated with the rainbow and it is multicolored. So how does the mansion bear resemblance to the rainbow? It is because of Sachitraha, Kalidasa says, because of paintings that are there on those mansions, which are also full of color, multicolored. So because of those paintings, they bear resemblance to the cloud, which is decorated with a rainbow. And Sangeetaya Prahata Murajaha Snigdha Gambhira Ghosham. So the cloud gives out a thundering noise, and how is that equated? Sangeetaya praharata murajaha. The women, they entertain themselves by listening or producing some music, and for that music they will need some percussion instruments. So when they play on the mridanga, it gives out a deep thunder as if resembling the cloud's thunder itself. Antastoyam manimaya bhuvaha. And the cloud has inside it a stream of water, and the mansions have a layer of gems, have a coating or a layer of gems on their floors. Manimaya bhuvaha. You can take it to be a layer of sapphire which has been coated on the floor. Sapphire is blue in color, so the blue color is reflective of the cloud's antastoya. And Tungam Abhram Lihagraha, and the cloud itself flies in very high positions, so that elevation is accounted for the high standing buildings of that city. Prasadastvam Tulaitumalam Yatra Taistair Visheshaihi. So probably the Yaksha thought the Alaka Nagari is itself a Bhoga Bhumi, and the cloud should not feel alienated once it enters into an unknown land. It has not seen that land, till this position in its life. It is going there for the first time. So it has to feel comfortable. And how do we feel comfortable? Because of some similarity that is established between our character and the characters that we encounter in some alien land. So probably it is because of that reason Kalidasa chose to write this verse. And in the next verse, we see a beautiful example of Kalidasa's genius. Here, he describes certain flowers that bloom in different seasons. In all the 6 seasons, he describes flowers that blow in all seasons. And by that, he says, all these flowers are seen simultaneously in one place in the Alakanagari, suggesting that in the Alakanagari all seasons exist simultaneously. So here we might encounter during Rutu Sandhi maximum the overlapping of 2 seasons, or maximum 3. That is also impossible. Maximum 3 seasons. But in Alakanagari, the beauty that can be experienced in all the 6 seasons put together is there for everybody to enjoy at one time in one place. So that is what Kalidasa says. Haste leela kamala malake bala kunda anuviddham nita lodhra prasava rajasa panduta manane shrihi chuda pashe navakuravakam charu karane shirisham Simante cha tvadupagamajam yatra nipam vadhunam. And he just does not give a very dry description of the flowers sitting on some trees or having themselves bloomed in some creepers. That is there for anybody to see. But here he describes the flowers as serving as ornaments on a beautiful woman. He says, the women of the Alaka Nagari, Haste Leela Kamala Malake, they sport lotuses in their hands. Women of those times, they used to move around with a flower in those hands. And, it was just a Leela Kamala. it is a sportive lotus which they have in their hands, and that is the lotus. Alake bala kunda anuviddham. And they used to decorate their hairs with fresh sprouts of jasmine. Balakunda. Nita lodhra prasava rajasa panduta manane shrihi. And they used to decorate their faces. They used to use face powders made of the lodhra pushpa. So the powdered, the pollen grains of the lodhra pushpa can serve as a very good face powder apparently. And chuda pashe nava kuravakam. And they used to wear the kuravaka flowers in their braids. Charu karane shirisham. And the shirisha pushpa, which is very tender, which is very delicate, and also it resembles in some way the jhumki which women use. So they use the shirisha pushpa to decorate their ears. Simantecha tvadupagamajam yatra nipam vadhunam. And in the Simanta, in the parting line of their hairs, they used to decorate it with kadamba flowers. So there are flowers. There is the description of 6 flowers here, each of which blooms in a different season. For example, the lotus blooms in the Sharat Kala, and the Balakunda, which is the jasmine, it blooms primarily in Hemanta, and the Shishira, in the Shishira season, blooms the Lodhra Pushpa, and the Kuravaka, which we can understand as the Spatika Pushpa or the Kanakambara as we call in Kannada, the Kuravaka, which it blooms in Vasanta, and the Shirisha Kusuma, the Shirisha flower, it blooms in summer, the Grishma Kala, Grishma Ritu, and the Kadamba blooms in the Varsha Kala or the rainy season. Again, there is some sort of reference to the cloud here. He says in the last line, Tvadupagamajam. So the cloud brings the rainy season to all places it goes. It is a rain-bearing cloud. So the Kadamba flowers, which bloom in the rainy season, is because of the cloud itself. So there is another. There is the connection with the cloud that just does not cease to present itself wherever we go in Meghadoota. And here we see an interpolated verse in Meghadoota. As I said before, there are a good number of interpolated verses in this kavya. And I will just give a brief description of this verse, though it is interpolated, in order to contrast the pratibha of a Mahakavi from that of a lesser poet. In this verse, in the verse that I just explained, I told you that Kalidasa does not explicitly say that in Alaka Nagari all the 6 seasons exist simultaneously. It is because of the description of 6 flowers that we understand, because of our knowledge of those flowers, we understand, and with the help of Mallinatha the commentator, that all seasons are there. But in the next poem, the interpolator, whoever he is, he describes the Alaka Nagari as Nitya Pushpaha, as a place where everything, all sorts of enjoyment are there eternally for people to enjoy. Nitya Pushpaha, flowers are always bloomed in that place. And Nitya Padma Nalinyaha, the ponds are always filled with lotuses. And Nitya Bhasvat Kalapaha, Kekot Kantha Bhavana Shekinaha, the peacocks are always giving out sounds. God knows if that person has actually heard the peacocks give out a cry. It is very unpleasant to hear. But he says Bhasva Nityat Kalapaha, Nityat Jyotsnaha Pradoshaha. All nights there are filled with moonlight. So there is no Amavasya, there is no Purnime in that land of Alaka. Every night is filled with moonlight. By using the word Nitya, Nitya, Nitya again in all 4 padas, the interpolator here has taken the possibility of any suggestion that we can draw from this verse. He has himself told of everything. So there is not much for a Sahridaya to think of, to imagine by himself and enjoy. So in a great piece of poetry, the poet has to have some sayama. He should not give out all details. There has to be some amount of details to be left to the imagination of Sahridayas. So this verse serves as a testimony to the pratibhas of 2 different poets. And from this, the cloud moves on and it explores the city of Alaka, wherein Kalidasa takes that opportunity to describe a sport, to describe a krida. And this is a very rare happening in poetry. Even in Meghadoota, this is a one-off happening. Kalidasa does not, describe sports very often, but here we see a description of sport. He says, Mandakinya salila shishiraihi sevyamana marudbhihi mandaraanam anutataruham chayaya varitoshnaha अन्वेष्टव्यैहि कनकसिकता मुष्टि निक्षेप गूढ़ैहि संक्रीडन्ते मणिभिहि अमर प्रार्थिता यत्र कन्याः. So in the city of Alaka, some girls are seen to be playing around on the banks of the river that is Ganga. And how is that? Mandakinya salila shishiraihi sevyamana marudbhihi. They are always, they are not tired at all. Why? Because there is a beautiful breeze blowing across the Ganga, and which is also cool upon coming into contact with the water of Ganga. So it is very cool and pleasant on the body. It is always blowing across. And also because of the thick and cool shade that is provided by the mandara vrikshas, that have been ground all across the banks of the river. So in that, and how are the girls playing? They are, there is this sort of a play where in our villages, children just take some sticks and they hide it in a heap of sand, and they blindfold some friend of them, and he will be given a stick in his hand, and he will be asked to hide it in some sand portion, and he will be made to turn around and taken to some other position, and after the blindfold is removed, he has to find the stick which is there in some which is there enveloped by sand somewhere. So a similar description in Alaka, but it is not mud there, it is gold itself. Gold serving as mud. Kanaka sikataha. And it is not the stick also which women use to play with. They use gems. They use precious gems to use as sticks. But the play is the same. Whether it is played by villagers who are ignorant of anything, who are uneducated in some way, and whether it is played using mud and sticks, or whether it is played using golden sand, gold which serves as sand, or precious gems, the sport, the enjoyment derived from both sports remain the same. That is the suggestion given by Kalidasa in this verse. And he moves on to describe the Alaka Nagari in varied detail, time and again here. And in one verse, he describes the Abhisarikas of Alaka Nagari. Previously, we had seen the descriptions of Abhisarikas who were moving around in the streets of Ujjaini. Here we see Abhisarikas of Alaka Nagari. And what is the difference between them two? Kalidasa says, Gatyutkampad Alaka Patitaihi Yatra Mandara Pushpaihi Patrachedaihi Kanaka Kamalaihi Karna Vibramshitaischa Muktajale Stana Parisarat Chinna Sutriischa Haraihi Naisho Margaha Saviturudaye Suchyate Kamininam. So when the Abhisarikas go in the night to meet their beloved ones, the path taken by those Abhisarikas, that will be revealed for all people to see during the mornings. So in the night, Kalidasa described that darkness as Suchi bhedyais tamobhihi yesterday. It was so dark. So obviously nobody can make out which path that Abhisarikas take to meet their beloveds. It will be visible in the mornings. How? Gatyutkampad alakapatitaihi yatra mandara pushpaihi. On the path there will be some mandara flowers which would have fallen down from the hair of the Abhisarikas. So on the path there will be strewn across by petals of mandara flowers. Patrachedeh kanaka kamalaihi karna vibramshitaischa. On the path will also be seen some petals or golden lotuses themselves which would have slipped from the ears of those Abhisarikas. muktajalaihi, and by pearls scattered all across, having fallen off from the necklaces of those abhisarikas. So by pearl beads. So by all this, on account of pearls, the mandara pushpas and the kanaka kamala, golden lotuses, one is able to make out the path taken by the abhisarikas. So, this is again a very circuitous way of expression. If we are asked to describe something, we will do it in a very direct manner. But this indirectness, this vakrata, this oblique way of expression is what distinguishes poetry from what is not poetry, as I told you in the first day itself. And after seeing all this, the cloud now actually comes to the house of the yaksha, and there is a description of the yaksha's house. Tatragaram dhanapati grihad uttarena asmadiyam durallaksham surapati dhanush charuna toranena yasyopamte kritakatanayaha kamtaya vardhito me hastaprapya stabaka namito balamandara vrikshaha. This is a beautiful verse. So the arched gateway to the house of the yaksha is the arch of that gateway is made by the rainbow in that place. So the torana, so how do we as lesser mortals decorate our houses? We decorate with sprouts of mango leaves. We use it as the torana. And what serves as a torana for the yaksha's house? It is the rainbow itself. It is Indra Chapa that serves as the torana. Tatragaram dhanapati grihad uttarena asmadiyam. And my house is located to the north of Kubera's house. So if the cloud enters into the Alakanagari, Kubera's house, nobody need give the cloud the direction to notice Kubera's house, because that is probably the most tallest building in that place, and it will be most affluent, it will be most opulent. So it is very easily identifiable by the cloud. But the yaksha here has to give the geographical coordinates of his house. So he says, my house is to the northern direction of Kubera's house. Dural Laksham Surapati Dhanush Charuna Toranena. It is decorated on its archway by the rainbow itself. Yasyopante Kritakatanayaha Kantaya Vardhito me Hastaprabhya Stabaka Namito Balamandara Vrikshaha. Yasya Upamte. On some side of that house, you will find a Balamandara Vriksha, a young Mandara tree, which, me, myself and my wife have poured water to it, and we have made it grow. It is very dear to us. We treat it as our son. Kalidasa says, Kritaka Tanayaha. So the intensity with which Kalidasa identifies all objects of his description with nature is so much so that the yaksha and the yakshi, who though they are separated, when they were together, they had planted a mandara vriksha which they treat as their son. Kritaka tanayaha bala mandara vrikshaha. And Kalidasa does not stop at that. He says, hastaprapya stabaka namitaha. The mandara vriksha is such that it is bowed down, it is hanging low on account of a cluster of flowers that can be reached by hand. So it is, because it is a bala vriksha, it is a young tree, if you just raise your hand, you can pick some of its flowers. It is so beautiful like that. And this is Kalidasa's poetry. This phrase, hastaprapya stabaka namitaha. There is so much in that phrase, and kritaka tanaya. In that one, there is the relationship that the yaksha and the yakshi had established with the tree, and in here we have a dynamic description for the cloud to identify whether it is the same mandara tree, because we see that there are multiple mandara vrikshas in the whole of Alakanagari. How can it identify this? It is a small tree, and if hastavacheya, hastaprapya, that is also a beautiful phrase, and it developed in various ways in Sanskrit. There are words like hastavacheya used to describe something that is within the reach of one's own arm. And Kalidasa uses such ideas very profusely in all his works. For example, in Kumarasambhava, he says, Yo hemakumbhastana nisritayaha skandasya matuhu payasam rasagnaha. While describing a tree, a Devadaru Vriksha, so how is that Devadaru Vriksha? It has experienced the Stanyapana of Parvati herself. So Parvati, the divine mother, she has so much of love for this Devadaru Vriksha that she has herself fed the Vriksha with her Stanyapana. So that is how Kalidasa describes. And even in Shakuntala, in the Abhignana Shakuntala Rupaka of Kalidasa, in the fourth act, Shakuntala says, while she is about to water some plants there, she's in the first act itself, she says, Astime sodarya snehaha eteshu. I have almost a fraternal affection for these plants. So that is the sort of bondage that all characters in all of Kalidasa's works have with Prakriti. In fact, Shakuntala had such intimate bond with nature that she had named one creeper as Vanajyotsna, that is forest's moonlight. And this is something that Kalidasa excels doing in infusing emotions into Prakriti, and he helps us enjoy Prakriti in that way. And in and around that house, the Yaksha helps the cloud identify his house by giving additional details about a vapi, or a pond or a well that was there. It had for its steps were made of emeralds, and it was always filled with golden lotuses, and the stalks of those lotuses were made with Vaidurya gems. That was the pond which was there. And there was also a Krida Shaila. As we saw, the Kailasa mountain is the Krida Shaila, pleasure mountain of Shiva and Parvati, as we saw in some verses before. Here, the Yaksha also has some Krida Shaila in his own backyard, though it is not the it is not the Kailasa itself. It is some sort of a hillock, and the Yaksha describes that Krida Shaila to the cloud. He says, Tasyastire rachita shikharaha peshalayir indranilaihi क्रीडाशैलः कनककदली वेष्टन प्रेक्षणीयः मद्गेहिन्याः प्रिय इति सखे चेतसा कातरेण प्रेक्ष्योपान्तस्फुरिततडितं त्वां त्वमेव स्मरामि. So how is the Krida Shaila? It is it is made of sapphires, Indranilamani. It is made of sapphires. It is blue in color, and on the skirts of that mountain, Kanaka Kadali Veshtana Prekshaniyaha. It is full of golden plantain trees, and on account of this, it again resembles the cloud with its lightning. So the Krida Shaila is blue in color. It is made of sapphires, and the cloud itself is blue again, and it has the lightning, which Kanaka Nikasha Snigdha. That is how Kalidasa had described the lightning in the description of Ujjaini. So we know that the lightning is golden, somewhat golden in its color. So on account of that color, it resembles the golden plantain trees that are there on the Krida Shaila. And the Yaksha says, whenever I see you, whenever I have a look at you, because of this close resemblance between you two, I am always reminded of that Krida Shaila, and maybe he is remembering a small stroll that he had with his wife and wants to get united with that. So the cloud is itself, the messenger itself, is acting as an Uddipana Vibhava for the Yaksha. It is making him think of all those times that he spent with his wife in the Alakanagari. And on that Krida Shaila, the Yaksha says, you can see two trees. One is the Rakta Ashoka and the other is Bakula. In this verse, which Kalidasa pens to describe those trees, he gives expression to a concept that is called Dohada. So dohada is some sort of an activity which is required for trees or for trees to bloom, for trees to produce flowers. This is some sort of an activity that is required. This is a poetic convention, and poets of a later period use it profusely. So in the manifold original contributions of Kalidasa, even this concept is one. We do not see any explicit reference to the concept of dohada in poetry that is predated to Kalidasa. So how are those trees, Raktashoka and Bakula? Raktashokaschala kisalayaha kesaraschatra kamtaha pratyasannau kuravaka vrutehe madhavi mandapasya ekassakhya stavasahamaya vama padabhilashi kangshatyanyo vadanamadiram dohadat chadmanasyaha. So there was a Madhavi mandapa with a hedge, with a fence made of kuravaka plants, and there was the Ashoka tree, and there was also the Kesara tree, that is the Bakula. And the Ashoka, for it to bloom, requires to be kicked ever so gently by a beautiful woman. So that is the taste of the tree. For it to bloom, for it to get some sort of a stimulation in order to be full of flowers, a beautiful woman who probably has an anklet, the jingling sounds of the anklets, she is expected to come to the tree and give it a gentle kick. That is about the Ashoka Vriksha. And then there is the Bakula Vriksha, which has its own taste. It wants a girl to come with it with a mouthful of wine and offer it that mouthful of wine. So if very literally speaking, the girl should spit on it with a mouthful of wine. Then that Bakula Vriksha, becomes full of flowers. And this is the concept of dohada, and Mallinatha, the commentator, gives us a whole verse in the Sraddhara meter, and he lists out 10 trees like the Ashoka and the Bakula, which require various activities, all done by women, mind you. So all our trees are Rasikas. They want women to do some things to them. Ashoka this, Bakula that, and there are other trees, 8 more. We see that. Mallinatha says, Padaghata dashokaha tilaka kuravako vikshana linganabhyam strinam sparshat priyanguhu vikasati bakula sidhu gandusha sekat mandaro narmavakyat patumrudu hasanat champako vaktravatat chutaha gitan nameruhu vikasati chapuro nartanat karnikaraha. He lists down 10 plants or 10 flowers. First, Padaghata dashokaha, that we have seen. Ashoka blooms when a beautiful girl kicks it. Padaghata dashokaha tilaka kurabako vikshana linganabhyam. So the tilaka tree blooms with flowers when a girl just looks at it. So it gets all excited when a girl just looks at it. And the kuravaka tree, that is the Kanakambara, just the sight of woman he does not suffice for it. It requires some women to go and hug it, give it a hug. So alinganabhyam, kuraka bears flowers when a beautiful girl goes and hugs it. And strinam sparshat priyanguhu, the priyangu tree, it is enough for a woman to just go touch it, and it is immediately full of flowers. Srinam sparshat priyanguhu vikasati bakulaha sidhu gandusha sekat. So we have seen that bakula blooms when it is offered a mouthful of wine. And mandaro narma vakyat. So it is enough for the mandara tree, which blooms in the heavens, just by a woman engaging in sweet talk with it. If a woman talks to it in sweet terms, it will be full of flowers. Mandaro narmavakyat patumrudu hasanat champakaha. And if a girl goes and smiles very happily in front of the tree, the champaka tree will bear flowers. And champako vaktravatat chutaha. And if a girl goes and blows on a tree, that is the mango tree, it will be full of fruits and flowers. Vaktravata chuto gitan nameruhu. If a girl sings in front of the nameru tree, then it will bear fruits. Gitan nameruhu vikasati cha puro nartanat karnikaraha. And if a girl goes and dances in front of the Karnikara tree, it will, beget flowers. So this is the kind of poetic conventions, used and applied by Sanskrit poets in almost all their works. So this has evolved into a tradition all by itself. And in between those two trees, the Ashoka tree and the Bakula tree, we have a Vasa Yashti. We have a golden pole, a stick of sorts, Yashti, a stick, golden stick. So Kalidasa describes that. And I had described 3 sorts of peacocks that Kalidasa describes. Here is the 4th sort, and it resembles the Vahana of Subramanya, which was so full of pride and arrogance that it did not dance by itself. Even this peacock, which is there in the Bhoga Bhumi of Alaka, is full of pride. It does not dance by itself. It has to be made to dance. Kalidasa describes that peacock here. Tanmadhye cha sphatika phalaka kanchani vasayashtihi mule baddha मणिभिः अनतिप्रौढवंश प्रकाशैः तालैः शिञ्जावलय सुभगैः नर्तितः कान्तयामे याम अध्यास्ते दिवस विगमे नीलकंठः सुहृद्वः. So the peacock is only to be seen there during the night times. Yam adhyaste divasa vigame. So when the day comes to an end, the peacock comes there. So where does it come? Tan madhyecha, in between the Ashoka tree and the Bakula tree, sphatika phalaka kanchani vasayashtihi. There is a golden stick and it has a crystal slab to it. Tan mule baddha manibhihi anati praudha vamsha prakashaihi. And the base of that stick is decorated by gems that have the color of young bamboo sticks. I'll come to that later. Tale shinja valaya subhagaihi nartitah kantayame. And there you will see a peacock which was made to dance by me and by my wife by account of hastatala. They were by clapping their hands, by beats of rhythm which they were counting on their hands. And it was not just the tala, it was also because of the jingling of bangles of the yakshi. Talaihi shinja valaya subhagaihi. So Kalidasa's poetry is so intricate that even while describing the dance of a peacock, he is not satisfied by giving out just that description. He has to say that it was made to dance by tala, which is a technical significance in music, by clapping hands, and the tala itself also does not suffice. He has to say shinja valaya subhagaihi. So shinja, as the Amarakosha says, nupuranam tu shinjitam. It is the sound which is emanated from ornaments. So valaya subhagaihi. Valaya is the bangles which the yakshi was supposedly wearing. And when she claps her hands, the bangles they will come into contact with each other and they will produce this beautiful metallic sound. And the tala will also have this additional sound of the jingling of those bangles. So by that the peacock will be made to dance. This is the kind of description that Kalidasa gives. And here in the second pada he says, Manibhihi anati praudha vamsha prakashaihi. This is another description of a color which again has stemmed from a very intent observation of nature. Anati praudha vamshaif prakashaihi. He does not say Bala Vamsha Prakashaihi. He says Anati Praudha Vamsha Prakashaihi. Not that mature bamboo trees, young bamboos, the color of them is the color of gems that is there at the base of that golden pole. So just for the description of a single color, Kalidasa he brings in so much of observation about different things in nature which we in the course of our day-to-day activities will never notice. All of us, have our day-to-day activities to fulfill, and we will not even spend a moment's time to look at those things. And even if we do not have the poetic ability to get into this. Use this in such a manner in poetry. Kalidasa has all of that. He has that, that prasannata of his mind. He has a very calm mind. He does not have any, personal interests in looking at nature. And only because of that, he is able to appreciate those little, seemingly insignificant details of nature. And he picks each of them up and uses them appropriately in his poetry. And moving forward, he also gives a description about the door of his house, which was apparently filled with symbols of Shankha and Padma. Dwaropamte likhita vapushau Shankha Padmau cha drushtva. So how can you recognize my house? It will have symbols of Shankha and Padma on the door. And the Yaksha then asks the cloud to go sit on the Krida Shaila, that which we saw some time before. Krida Shaile Prathama Kathite Ramyasano Nishannaha. You first go sit on top of that mountain. So this is built upon by the poet from the very beginning. So mountains and the cloud are said to be good friends. And Kinna Shikarishu Padam Nyasya Ganta Asiyatra. That was there in Purva Megha. So this is called as Pratignya Nirvaha in poetry and in Shastra. So how do our ancient texts function? There is something called as the Pratignya Vakya, which authors of some certain texts, that they proclaim, that they write at the very beginning of a text. And that has to be maintained as it is. That consistency in the description of that concept, which was elaborated upon at the beginning of the text, has to be maintained in the same very consistency till the end of the text. It is very somewhat easy to achieve that in a work of Shastra, because it has some scientific and logical consistency to it. But here it is about creative ideas in which consistency has to be maintained. So that difficulty in maintaining, the ideas themselves are very, they are evanescent. It is very hard to get grip of an idea. And Kalidasa is a master of that. And still, even having a grip of those evanescent idea, he is expected to maintain some consistency in those ideas. So Kalidasa's genius reveals itself to us in such details. We have to appreciate Kalidasa's poetry for such details. And having described the ins and outs of his house, and having described the door of the house, now the Yaksha gives an account of his wife. So the cloud has to actually deliver the message of the Yaksha to the Yaksha's wife. So the cloud has to know who is Yaksha's wife. And Kalidasa just, does this description, though in a whole verse. The entire essence of it is captured in just a single phrase. Srushti Radhyeva Dhatuhu. That is what Kalidasa says. You will see my wife, and the relationship between the cloud and Yaksha's wife has already been established. Bhartrujayam Drakshasi. You will see your sister-in-law. That is how the Yaksha had described his own wife to the cloud. And how is she? Srishti Radhyeva Dhatuhu. She is like the first creation of the creator, of Brahma, when he wanted to create, embark on the journey of creation. This is the first thing he created. So Brahma obviously won't create some insignificant thing as his first creation, because first things are always remembered in our things. Adya is also most beautiful and most remarkable, and it is not the mere chronology, one after the other. Adya is most important and the most significant creation. So if you want to behold the most significant creation of Brahma, you will see that in the Yaksha's wife. And we see a similar description, even a more beautiful description done by Kalidasa of Parvati in Kumara Sambhava. There he says, Sarvopama dravya samuchayena yatha pradesham viniveshitena sa nirmita vishwasrija prayatnat ekastha saundarya didrikshayeva. So, how was Parvati? She was created like everybody else by the Lord of creation, that is Brahma himself. While he was, going about his business, creating things, he at once felt that now I want to witness the beauty of all things put together. So, if he is creating human beings, some people will have beautiful eyes, some people will have beautiful cheeks, and so on and so forth. But Brahma wanted to witness all that beauty in a single individual. Sarvopama dravya samuchayena. And ekastha saundarya didrikshayeva. So he wanted to see all that beauty in one place, and that is Parvati. So, any amount of bodily details won't achieve this effect in poetry. Some poets, they describe, Kalidasa himself does that. But that effect is not achieved as it is done by this description. By saying, for instance, Srishti Radyeva Dhatuhu, or the description of Parvati here. Next come a set of very beautiful verses in which the Yaksha describes to the cloud the various activities of his wife, the Yakshi. So when the cloud goes to meet the Yakshi, she has to be seen doing something. So how can the cloud recognize that? The poet says, Nunam tasyah prabala rudito chuna netram priyayaha nishwasanam ashishirataya bhinna varnadharoshtham hastanyastam mukham asakalav vyakti lambalakatvat indor dainyam tvadanusarana klishta kamter bibharti. And this verse, I feel, is full of inaction. There is no activity in this verse, whereas the next verse is full of action. So a poet has multiple devices, multiple ways of going about doing a description. So here Kalidasa has employed the tool of inaction and action in consecutive verses. One is static and the other is dynamic. In this verse we see the concept of staticness, inaction. So how was the Yaksha's wife? Nunam tasyah prabala rudito chuna netram priyayaha uchuna netram. Her eyes are all swollen due to excessive, constant, incessant crying. She was crying all the time. She was so depressed and her eyes had swollen up. Nishwasanam ashishirataya bhinna varna adharoshtham. And because of her continuous heavy, warm intake and outtake of breath, the charm of her lips, which was during one time bright red in color, it has become completely lackluster now. Nishwasanam ashishirataya, due to the warm breath that is escaping out of her nostrils, sigh. And she is repeatedly sighing, and because of that her lips have become lackluster. Hastanyastam mukham, and she is always sitting with her face in her hand. We can very well imagine this posture in Virahis. This is a common posture for all people to sit in. Ayo Rama yenaitappa andre hing ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂತಾರೆ ಜನ. ಏನಾಯ್ತು ಅಂತ ಮುಖ ಕೈ ಮೇಲೆ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಆಕಾಶನೇ ತಲೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಬಿದ್ದು ಹೋದಾಗ ಹೇಗೆ ಕೂತ್ಕೋತಾರೋ ಹಾಗೆ ಕೂತಿದ್ಲು ಅಂತ. So when a person is in a state of pensive state of mind, that is how hastanyastam mukham. And the next description, this any poet can write, though it is a minute description, but the next phrase is only Kalidasa's. Asakalav vyakti lambalakatvat indor dainyam tvadanusarana klishta kanter bibharti. Her face is not completely seen. It is covered partially because of her long hairs. Because of her viraha, she has not even found the interest to comb her hair. So her hair is flowing all across her face and it is obstructing the vision of her face. And how does that appear? It is like the moon which is obstructed by the cloud. So the beauty of the moon, which is obstructed by a cloud, how does that appear? Similar is the sight of the Yakshi, whose tresses are obstructing the beauty of her face. So this is the kind of detailing into which Kalidasa goes. And in the next verse, as I told you before, he gives a description of which is full of activity. So the Yakshi is engaged in doing so many things to entertain and sustain herself. And the point to be noted here is that all these activities are not random things. What she is doing here is all connected with the Yaksha. So what is she doing? Alokete nipatati pura sa balivyakula matsadrishyam virahatanuva bhavagamyam likhanti पृच्छन्ति वा मधुरवचनां सारिकां पंजरस्थां कच्चित् भर्तुः स्मरसि रसिके त्वं हि तस्य प्रियेति. So what is she engaged in doing? She may be offering bali, that is worship. Bali is not slaughtering, it is worship. It means only worship, puja in Sanskrit. So she might be praying to the deities. What is she praying for? Obviously to be united with the Yaksha. Kalidasa does not make it explicit. It is obvious from the context that she is offering worship because of that. Or she might be engaged in drawing a picture of mine. Matsadrishyam virahatanuva bhavagamyam likhanti. Or if she is not seen doing any of this, she might be questioning the pet parrot which is there in its cages. She will be asking it, you parrot, you were once the favorite of my husband. You have spent so many beautiful moments with him. Do you remember him? So she is fed up of thinking about the Yaksha all by herself, and she is striking a conversation with the parrot because it is a favorite of the Yaksha. And she is asking it, do you remember my husband? Do you remember, a good friend of yours? And here in the second pada, Kalidasa says, she is drawing a picture, and Kalidasa uses a word, bhavagamyam likhanti. It is a picture that captures the emotion of the person rather than the mere physical details of the person. There is a difference between Rupa Chitra and Bhava Chitra. Here Kalidasa says Bhavagamya Chitra. It is a Bhava Chitra which captures the emotional depth of the person. So it is an emotional portrait than a mere line sketch, outlining the physical stature. It is not a mere anatomical portrait. It is an emotional portrait. And even in the next verse, the Yakshi is seen producing some music. And Kalidasa says, Utsangeva malina vasane saumya nikshipya veenam mad gotrankam virachita padam geya mudgatu kama tantri mardram nayana salilaihi sarayitva kathanchit bhuyo bhuyaha swayamapi krutam murchanam vismaranti. Utsangeva malina vasane saumya nikshipya veenam. She is, because she has lost all sorts of interests. She has not decorated herself, and she is wearing tattered, soiled garments. She has not bothered to dress herself up in beautiful clothes. She is wearing dirty garments, and she has a veena, that is a lute, on her lap. Madgotrankam virachita padam geya mudgatu kama, and she is about to sing a song whose lyrics are marked by my signature. Tantri mardram nayana salilaihi sarayitva kathanchit. And because she is so continuously crying, because there is a continuous stream of tears coming out from her eyes, they are falling on the strings of the veena. So when water comes into contact with the metal, it will completely disrupt the activity of those strings. So the veena won't sound right. So she is somehow wiping those tears off from those strings of the veena, and she says bhuyo bhuyaha swayamapi kritam murchanam vismaranti. So she had tuned a song, probably about the Yaksha, which he had himself written. She had tuned a song herself. She had composed the Arohana and the Avarohana, that is called the scale or the Murchana in Sanskrit. She had tuned it herself, but because of her condition, because of her viraha, she is repeatedly forgetting the scale, the Aroha or Avaroha, which she had herself tuned. So, and this is, this does not happen once. Kalidasa says, Bhuyo Bhuyaha. Even, wiping off the tears from the strings of the veena, or the singing, or, this composing the scale of the song, all these are repeated activities. It gives us an understanding that the Yakshi was engaged in this as a daily affair. She was, even though she tried to sing every day, she cannot get herself to sing. She wants to sing, she wants to entertain herself in some manner, but is not able to do it. And in here, we have an important bit of information about the musical tradition of India. We get to know that by Kalidasa's time, the music had taken almost a concrete shape, and the pada, or the composition, it was expected. Some compositions were expected to be were expected to have the signature of the composer, of the lyricist. So Madgotrankam, that is called the mudra or the mudranka. Madgotrankam. So here we get to know that the yaksha had composed the song and the wife had tuned it. So this is a very beautiful thing for a husband and wife to engage in. So, in the hymns of the marriage ritual, we have a beautiful verse, we have a beautiful mantra where a husband and wife pledge with each other by saying, if you are the Ruk, I am the Sama to it. Alluding to the tradition of the Vedas, where each mantra has some Viniyoga in the Sama Veda. It is called Udgita. The verses in the Rig Veda can also be sung by using the rules of Samaveda. So the husband and the wife say, if you become the Rig Veda, if you are, in the form of a verse, I will be the song to it. I will provide music to it. So that is the sort of connection established between a husband and wife right from the time of Vedas. And Kalidasa uses this to describe the sort of relationship, to describe the sort of emotional integrity and the love, mutual regard that the husband and wife had for each other in this manner. And if she is not seen doing this also, she might be, counting the number of months that has elapsed from the day of, from the day when her husband parted with her. And how does she do that? The Dehali, that is the threshold in front of their houses, on the day when the Yaksha left, was decorated with flowers. Since then, the same flowers are lying there. And because it is the Alaka Nagari, they're as they are when on that day. And she is repeatedly counting the days by taking the help of those flowers. She is picking each one of them up and trying to have the count of the number of days which are left for her to be reunited with her husband. And or she might be imagining, or she might not do any of this at all. Just she might be imagining unison with me in her mind. So all of this can happen, and Kalidasa says, Prayenaite Ramana Viraheshu Angananam Vinodaha. These are typical activities which women at least try, if not achieve, to engage themselves in when they are, separated from their husbands. And he also describes in many verses, and the cloud is asked to deliver the message at night, during the night, to the beloved of the Yaksha. Why? Because the Yakshi is somehow passing the time during the day by at least trying to be engaged in all these activities. She is trying to sing, she is trying to tune the veena and some such things. So there is something to keep her busy with. But during the night she can't do any of this. She is left all by herself, and there is no sort of activity during the night. She will be all alone. She will be tossing and turning on the bed. In fact, Kalidasa says she is lying on the ground. She has even forgotten the bed. She is lying on the bare ground. So if you go to her during the night, it will prove to be much more helpful to her. So please deliver my message during the night. That is what he says. And there is also when you go to my wife to deliver my message, Kalidasa gives a very beautiful description. I will quickly make a mention of that. When you go there, Tvaya sanne nayanam upari spandi shanke mrigakshaha meenakshobha chalakuvalaya shritulam eshyatiti. So when you go to her, she will be, she will look at you with all excitement. And how does her eyes appear? It is as though in a pond a lotus has been bloomed, and if a fish happens to come into contact with that lotus, it will be slightly agitated, at least for that moment. So her eyes were, filled with movement, as though it was the movement of the lotus that was agitated when a fish, came in its way. This is the sort of very complex imagery that Kalidasa gives. He must have really, observed nature, a fish, a pond, and a lotus in it, and he uses all this in his poetry in a beautiful manner. And the Yaksha also says, please do not disturb her if she is sleeping. She might be dreaming of me, enjoying a very beautiful moment of unition with me. So if she is sleeping, please wait for some time. Don't disturb her, just at that moment. The very point of the cloud making the journey, reaching Alaka from Ramagiri, is to deliver the message. And when it comes there, it does not rush into its activity. The Yaksha asks the cloud to not rush into its activity, to not to be in a state of haste. He asks the cloud to wait, just because she is sleeping. So this sort of compassion is also a constant feature in all of Meghadoota, not just between the Yaksha and his wife. He has so much compassion for all people in love, not just for people, for all things of nature in love. We saw the lotus and the sun, the rays of the sun touching the lotus yesterday. So this is the sort of sahanubhuti the Yaksha has come to achieve by means of this Vipralambha Shringara. And if she is still sleeping for a long time, then you might rouse her by a cool breeze filled with drops of water. Just gently wake her up, and in doing that, don't scare her by your lightning. Don't give life to her lightning so that she will be immediately scared by a flood of light appearing on her face. Don't do that. And please give her my message. And what is the actual message? In what words? Let us have a look at that very quickly. Bharturu mitram priyam avidhave viddhimam ambuvaham tatsandeshaihi hridaya nihitaihi agatam twatsamipam yovrindani tvarayati pathi shramyatam proshitanam mandrasnigdhaihi dvanibhihi abala veni mokshotsukani. So the very first words of the cloud to the Yakshi are words of reassurance. The first word is your husband, Bhartuhu. The very word that she is wanting to hear from 8 months, the cloud goes there and immediately says that word. It does not say anything else. If someone says your husband, then she is all ears. She wants to hear, what about my husband? Bhartur mitram. I am a friend of your husband's. So she is all the more excited. She wants to know, what is it about? You are a friend of my husband. I want to know what you want to say. Priyam avidhave. So by saying avidhave, you are not a vidhava. She is saying your husband is alive. The cloud is saying your husband is alive. So in these 3 words, Bhartur mitram priyam avidhave, Kalidasa has given the highest of reassurance to the wife. This would not have been achieved by saying, okay, your husband is engaged in an army, he is killing thousands of people. Not anything. Priyam avidhave, your husband is alive. Vidhimam ambuvaham, know me as a cloud. tat sandeshaihi hridayanihitaihi agatam tat samipam. I have come to you with a message of your husband, so please listen to me. And how am I? When I proceed in my journey, my only job is to, make haste of people, the travelers who have, like your husband, who are separated from their wives. I ask them to move swiftly toward their homes. So the very activity, the very job of the cloud is to reunite people who are, in different positions. So the travelers who have gone out on assignments in the rainy season, they cannot travel anymore. So they have to go back to their wives and get reunited. So the job of the cloud itself is so conducive to achieve the objective of the Yakshi and the Yaksha, and the very way in which the cloud starts its message is very beautiful. And probably Kalidasa has, given a tip of his hat to Valmiki in his Ramayana, where when Hanuman comes back to Rama after having seen Sita, he says, the very first words he says, Drishta Sita, I saw Sita. So Rama just wanted to hear that, Drishta Sita. That means she is alive. In the same way, the cloud says, Avidhava, your husband is alive. And the Yaksha gives a very beautiful account of what he is trying to do when he is separated. So the Yakshi now she has gotten reassurance that her husband is alive, but what is he doing? He says, Tvamalikhya pranaya kupitam dhaturagais shilayam atmanam te charanapatitam yavadichhami kartum asreistavan muhur upachitaihe drishtiralupyate me krurastasmin napina sahate sangamam nau kritantaha. This is the Yaksha directly speaking to his wife. She says, I want to fall at your feet and just get reunited with you. So I try to, draw a picture of you using the minerals which are there in the Ramagiri where I am situated. When I try to write a picture of you using those minerals, Dhaturagais shilayam, on a piece of rock, Atmanam te charanapatitam yavadichhami kartum. So I would like to fall at the feet of the picture that I have drawn of you. Asreistavan muhurupachitaihi drishtiralupyate me. Because of continuously flowing streams of tears, though that picture which I had drawn gets erased off, repeatedly gets erased off. So even if I want to virtually unite with you, get united with you in the form of a picture that I get myself to draw somehow by using some sort of a mineral there, the cruel fate, I do not know what papa that I had done to the vidhi. It does not allow me to get united with my wife, even in the form of a painting. That is the sort of description Kalidasa gives here. And again he says the Yaksha wants the breeze to blow from the Himalayas, which has in it the fragrance of Mandara Vrikshas, just because it passes through the Alaka Nagari and obviously has come into contact with his wife. So if the same wind blows on the Yaksha's body, he can, have experience the contact of his wife. This is again taken from the Valmiki's Ramayana, where he says, Vahivata yatah kanta tam sprishtva mamapi sprisha tvaime gatra samsparshaha chandre drishti samagamaha. This is the words of Rama when he is when he is separated from Sita. He says, Vahivata yatah kanta, O wind, please blow to me from the position where Sita is in, because tvaime gatra samsparshaha, in you, because you have touched Sita, I can have the pleasure of her touch virtually. Tvaime gatra samsparshaha chandre drishti samagamaha. And the moon, the Chandra, is one constant thing for all people on earth. So if I look at the moon from here and Sita looks at there, all our vision converges in the moon. So how can one get united when they are separated? By means of this. These are what poets are for. They think of ideas to unite people even though when they are separated. And Kalidasa does this very beautifully. And the Yaksha says, don't lose heart, we will get united very soon. And he gives a very broad-based reassurance. He says, Kasyatyantam sukham upanatam dukkham ekam tatova nichair gacchatyuparicha dasha chakranemi kramena. no state of happiness or no state of sadness is eternal. They keep changing like the rim of a wheel that is constantly in motion. So one position X, which was in a state of happiness, will lead to a position Y, which is in a state of sadness. So it is a continuous dynamic cycle. So don't lose your heart. Keep yourself alive. And even I am trying very hard to stay alive. And, by means of that, he says, the Yaksha also gives a very beautiful reason. He says, Snehanahu kimapi virahe dhvamsinaste tvabhogat ishte vastun nyupachita rasa prema rashi bhavanti. This is what the Yaksha says. Some people might spread some misinformation, some false information. They might try to, pollute in your mind. They will say that out of sight is out of mind. Your husband might have married somebody else. So don't wait for him. Even you find your happiness in somebody else. Don't listen to any of that. He says, Sneha nahuhu kimapi virahe dhvamsinaste. So the love or the affection, they are supposed to lose their edge in separation. But I tell you with all confidence that it is not so. The love or affection that are intended into people that we have really true emotions for, they won't get reduced with time or separation. Spatio-temporal factors don't affect such love in any way, but instead prema rashi bhavanti, they get accumulated into a heap of love. This is the sort of reassurance, confidence that Kalidasa instills, and he ends this kavya by saying, he does not say whether the cloud actually makes the journey, but has so much sahanubhuti for the cloud itself, which has happily agreed at least to stay for so long and listen to the Yaksha's message. He says, Mabhudevam kshanamapi sakhe vidyuta viprayogaha. O cloud, you have given me a helping hand for all these moments. You're helping me in my moment of distress. So may you be never separated from your wife. That is the lightning. This is Kalidasa's Meghadoota. I thank you all for listening to me for these 4 days. Thank you. Namaskar.